We're now at our last talk of the day, following on the heels of a panel that explored views of the museum as sites for new experiences, and a talk-come performance that approaches the edges of art and provoked questions about how it's defined. Our next speaker will reflect on a remarkable body of work that explores the natural world, reflecting on the intersections of mankind and nature, and where the linearity of human thinking and the patterns of the natural world meet. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Richard Long.
Right. The first things I made in my life were mud pies on my front porch when I was 3 years old. Little mounds of dry earth that I made a hollow in the top, like the top of a volcano, like a crater, and then I would pour water into the hollow so that it would mix with the dry earth to make a kind of squidgy mud pie. When I was 7, in my mother's baking tray, I made the model of a riverbed in plaster of Paris, with like little creeks and inlets, and then I would fill it up with water to simulate the tide coming in. And really, that's because I was born and grew up by a river which has the second highest tides in the world. In fact, it's like between 10 and 12 or 13 meters between high tide and low tide, which is enormous. So I was always fascinated by, sometimes the river was completely full, like flooded, and other times the river was completely empty, with these enormous tidal mud riverbanks. At my secondary school, I was a school artist. I always painted all the scenery, and then in my last year, I was allowed in my summer holidays, without any supervision, they let me come in, and I painted a long mural in the dining hall, which was like 45 feet long, which actually lasted for over 50 years until they pulled the school down to make a bigger school. So all this kind of like childhood stuff led me obviously to going to art school. My local art school in Bristol, which is quite a sort of like a normal provincial art school. And it was after a couple of years, I realized that, I seemed to realize that the world outside the studio was far more interesting than the painting and sculpture that I was doing inside it. In other words, the limitless potential of the whole world for me to engage in. And all those possibilities and all that phenomenon that brings with it. Anyway, so this preamble really leads me into this short talk about my life as an artist. I consider I come out of the flux of artistic ideas in the mid-60s, which included minimal art, conceptual art, land art, and the Italian art movement called arte povera, art made from common, poor materials. In fact, also with hindsight, I consider A Line Made by Walking from 1967 a true arte povera work, making, as it were, something from nothing. That was a sculpture which was also a path. In a subsequent work, A Straight 10-Mile Walk, my line walked in the grass became a line drawn on the map. So So from all this, I realized that a journey could be a work of art. I could deconstruct sculpture over the distance of a journey, with time becoming the fourth dimension. In my cycling sculpture from 1967, along a continuous day-night bicycle ride, I left 16 parts of the same work in different places surrounding an area of about 1,700 square miles. In 1974, I walked from coast to coast across Ireland, placing a nearby stone on the road at every mile, making a spaced-out sculpture of 164 stones along 164 miles. A symmetry or balance between being both a walk and a sculpture. So walking as a medium has enabled me to articulate ideas about time and space, space meaning distance. And walking was so simple and practical. I could do it on the country roads of England or in the public wilderness areas of national parks. Walking represented independence and freedom. I could make art, I could be an artist, potentially, theoretically, anywhere in the world, just for the price of an air ticket. In 1969, I made a work on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. At the time, I thought that was probably the highest sculpture in the world. I like to think so anyway. Also on that trip, I made a walk along the equator, a zigzag walk from one hemisphere to the other. In those days, I did not feel the need of money for the ownership or possession of land, or for the use of big machines to make my work. In that sense, it was a very different philosophy from American land art. I was interested in scale, but not in mass, not in building monuments. I could make the work 1,000 miles in 1,000 hours just by walking. In the 1970s, I had the idea to walk exactly 100 miles, up and down, back and forth, in a straight line, in different landscapes around the world. The first was across the boggy mountains of the west of Ireland. The next, the red outback of Australia. The next, the high plains of Alberta, like walking on a sea of grass. And lastly, in a bamboo forest in Japan. The idea was that the straight walk, the 100 miles, stayed the same, but the places, the landscapes, changed. For me, walking in wilderness landscapes is always the best way to find places to make sculptures along the way, which is some of the images you saw in the first part of the slides. Those are the works I'm talking about. I consider these works like the stopping places or marks of passage. They are of the place, which is itself part of the locality. They are a sort of unique celebration of the place, like its stones, or the horizon, or the mist, and of me being there at that particular time, possibly never to pass that way again. I sometimes think of these works as like songs. I have said that a sculpture be as far as the eye can see, meaning the stones could be aligned to a feature on the horizon, for example, or a passing cloud in relation to the viewer. It is never my intention that these landscape sculptures remain permanently or become known sites to be visited. Rather, that they are out there in the world somewhere, perhaps to be seen by chance by locals, or even nobody at all. But nevertheless, they embody the spirit that art can be made anywhere, at any time, spontaneously, in solitude, in remote, empty places, which is still, in fact, the reality and characteristic of most of our planet. Over the years, I have chosen many different landscapes to find the locations for these sculptures, from the Himalayas to the Andes, you've seen two of those images. From the Sahara to Mongolia, from Alaska to Antarctica, from China to Egypt. I have made works, circles even, on all 5 continents. First, I need to make these works, and then later to communicate either the images or ideas in various ways, like in photographs or text works. My art uses simple but various strategies, and I'm interested in the different ways I can make my art and how it can be put in the world, how it may exist or not exist. For example, from a work in an art fair like here, to a water drawing on a rock face in Mexico that dries in the sun in minutes. In that case, the image, the memory, is recorded by a photograph and becomes art in another way. And that photograph itself can exist in different forms, from a framed work, or in books, or postcards, or on a website, or even as an image like in this talk. Many of my stone sculptures in the landscape could be scattered by the elements or animals. My line in the Himalayas, which I think is coming up next, on the Khumbu Glacier, would naturally have broken up and disintegrated as the glacier moved down the valley. Stones I place on roads can be seen, but not recognized or identified as art. Their meaning is only known in the narrative of a text work or in the title of a photo work, perhaps. Nevertheless, the stones do not... That's the line on the Khumbu Glacier, by the way. Nevertheless, the stones that I place on roads, for example, they don't disappear. They are out there in the world, anonymously, as they were before I used them, transformed only in the context of my art. I'm not a conceptual artist, meaning I use real stones, I walk my walks, and they are made in real time. Nevertheless, ideas are very important, especially in the landscape works. So these are just a few favourite examples of some of my favourites. 1,000 stones added to the footpath cairn. Cairns are common to many footpaths the world over, to mark the way, etc. They are made cumulatively and collectively by passing travellers. I added exactly 1,000 stones as my sculpture to an existing cairn, which will then have been subsequently added to by countless others over the years. So this work becomes part of a social continuum. Two works about sea level. 1,449 stones placed on a hill at 1,449 feet above sea level. Sea level water line, a line of water poured along the desert ground of Death Valley in California. In Alaska, I made a circle of driftwood on the Arctic Circle, one type of circle upon another. Some walks about ideas. Throwing a stone around McGillycuddy's Reeks. McGillycuddy's Reeks are a group of mountains in the west of Ireland. I found a white marble stone and threw it forward from place to place, from throw to throw, on a walk around this ring of mountains, returning the stone to the place where I found it, an alternative to walking to the summits. A cloudless walk, France, 1995. An eastward walk of 121 miles in 3.5 days, from the mouth of the Loire to the first cloud. When I started that walk, my intention was to walk across France, and I didn't know what was going to happen on that. But then I noticed that every day dawned completely cloudless, completely blue skies. So I thought it was a better idea to make that particular walk about measuring it when I saw the first cloud, whenever that was. I thought that was maybe more original and more interesting way to make that walk. And I suppose if I'd had that idea over here, it might have been a very long walk. So that's a good example of how opportunism, or being open to change or changing circumstances, actually can affect or exists in my work. By contrast, this is an example of a very predetermined idea. So I had the idea first, and it was just a question of carrying it out. A 5-day walk, England, 1980. First day, 10 miles. Second day, 20 miles. Third day, 30 miles. Fourth day, 40 miles. Fifth day, 50 miles. A sort of balance or symmetry between easy walking and relatively hard walking. A work about my interest in time and movement. Walking in a moving world. A 6-day walk in Wales recording decreasing speeds, from passing through racing cloud shadows to climbing over a glacial boulder moving at geological slowness. Crescent to Cross. A walk from the Great Mosque of Cordoba in Spain to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. An 18-day walk in Spain and Portugal connecting two histories and religions. I'm interested in universals: stones, water, clay, days, circles, symmetry, gravity, footpaths, roads. Walking is universal. We walked out of Africa for the first time as humans, on foot. Journeys are common to all people and all cultures, yet it interests me to make walks that follow or realize original ideas, which are different from making journeys, or exploring, or being nomadic. Walking as art, in fact. Sometimes I walk almost as a ritual. For example, on a meandering wilderness walk, I will sometimes walk repeatedly up and down to make a straight path, as a sculpture along the walking route. Formal walking within journey walking. Using walking as both medium and measure, I have utilized or referenced many natural and cosmic phenomena in my work, like the equinox, the midsummer and midwinter solstice, sun and moon total eclipses, the tides, meaning lunar time. So sometimes I've measured, instead of measuring walks by days and nights, I've measured it by tides. That's what I mean by lunar time. Tidal bores or waves, the Earth's magnetic axis, and I've used walking as metaphors for events on the subatomic scale. I have used stones to represent atomic particles. I've made a walk about the Japanese tsunami. I have no interest in other people making my work. It is my human scale, my body, which I use as a measure of the land and myself. How many days it takes me to walk across Spain, or between one shower of rain and the next, for example. My sculptures are what stones I can pick up, or lift, or carry, or the marks I make with my feet or hands. They are about my energy or tiredness, my engagement. It has always been my pleasure and intention to be in nature, whether walking down a country road or in mountains or deserts, in all weathers, in rain, wind or snow, with my rucksack on my back, sleeping in my tent at night. On those trips, I feel the most energized, focused, and creative. So I would say my work is my dialogue both physical and mental, with the world I live in. Now, if any of you would like to ask questions, I'd be happy to answer them. You? Do you ever walk with other people? Occasionally, yeah, but not. Yeah. Do I walk with other people?
Yes, and does it feel different? And if so,
it
how?
is different. So, as I say, like part of my pleasure is really to be alone. So it's like a very one-on-one experience. So it's not. I've done all types of walks. So, but I guess. But I'm never completely alone. You know, in other words, there's many along every walk I meet people. It's not like I'm. You know, I meet fellow travellers. I meet other climbers. If I'm doing a road walk, I stay in bed and breakfast. You know, I eat in pubs. So I'm not really alone. But I have to say, I like to make like sculptures like you're seeing in these pictures. I mean, it's a great pleasure to make these completely on my own in solitude.
Hi, while you're here in UAE, are you planning to make a work in the landscape?
No, I'm just, it's a very short visit, unfortunately. I suppose one thing to say about characteristic, which is very obvious to say, but I've only ever walked where I can find water. So it's because I would never carry water. So that's obviously one of the givens that. But I did go to I went to the Sahara once. The Hogar Mountains in Algeria, and as the plane was coming into land, I noticed there were little glints of water, and it had rained for the first time in like 10 years in the mountains that I was going. I assumed that I was just going to base my whole walk centered on this like little spring that was marked on the map. So it turned out that I was able to make a much more extensive walk by just drinking the water from these pools that were left by the rain. Then after 6 days, the pools dried up, so that was the end of the walk.
Have you ever visited Stonehenge? And if so, what is your interpretation of it?
Yes, of course I've visited Stonehenge, but it's not, I would say it's not, I went to Stonehenge for the first time when I was about 19 or 20, strangely enough. So it wasn't, it wasn't really a big cultural influence on my work.
No, I just wondered if what would be your interpretation of Stonehenge?
Well, I would say it's obviously made by a very sophisticated and like a social culture. Most art today, most of the artists in this Abu Dhabi Art Fair, we make art as individualists, as I do. Obviously, Stonehenge was maybe conceived as a big religious or social monument for probably reasons that we don't really understand.
I just have one more question.
But I would say, in general, obviously, the English landscape actually is in my DNA. I spent a lot of my childhood holidays in the southwest on Dartmoor, where obviously I was seeing granite and stone circles and stone walls, and so I would say it was the influence on my work of the English landscape is on a much lower level than something like Stonehenge.
So how are you able to move the rocks? I mean, some of them seem quite large.
Well, actually, yeah. So if they're large, they're just the ones that are just lying there, and I just heave them upright. So everything that you see in these photographs are what I can physically do with my hands, my energy at that moment. So if they're too heavy to pick up, then I don't pick them up. I don't move them. So that everything is dictated by the limits of my strength.
Could your landscape art be
That was
as well?
that was the Olympic road race, by the way.
Could it as well be called solitude
What?
art?
Sorry?
Solitude art.
I don't understand what you're saying.
It's like it's very lonely. What I see.
Lonely.
Yes. So if you have traveled 5 continents, and this is the conclusion of your work, then you could easily call it solitude, no?
Well, it is about, yeah, that's one aspect of it, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Hello. I'm curious about what is going to happen after there has been an installation, for instance, in a sculpture park or area, which, of course, nature takes over.
Yeah.
Because there are mosses or whatever could happen if... So how do you feel about what's happening after an installation?
Well, I mean, something like this with just the stones. Well, the big one, the stones would just get like thrown away. Or I don't really. I mean, the work is really just made for the time of that big exhibition. But this work here, the stones will be, put in boxes and it can be remade. So a lot of the sculptures that you're seeing in some of these photographs can be remade by other people, because I make a certificate that explains how it's made. Like a circle has to be so big and the density is so much and everything.
But I mean...
But I know what you mean in the outdoor works. I don't make so many permanent works in like sculpture parks or something. So my preferred way of being an artist is to make work in the wilderness, where it naturally just disappears and gets returned to the elements. So permanence is not it's not a big deal for me. It's I go with the flow, as it were. Whereas a work like this, that can be. I mean, I remade that in a that's in England. That was installed in England, but I remade that myself in for a collector in America, and that could probably last hundreds of years. It's slate, so it's very robust and it's all locked together, so nothing will move. So if lichen grows on it or whatever, that's all part of it. Whereas a work like that, so this is a permanent work. So this is in the Hearst Tower in New York, and it's made with a combination of mud from my local river in England, the Avon, and the Hudson. So it's like mud from 2 rivers that flow into the same ocean. And the mud is very robust. It's like, think of cave paintings. So it's organic, and it's extremely hard wearing, and nothing will happen to it. So that's River Avon mud. And unfortunately, in an ideal world, I mean, that's installed for a gallery show in New York, but in an ideal world, a work like that would be great if it stayed forever. So that's from a show in Italy. That's like Italian terracotta. So sometimes I use the mud, and that's adobe. That's actually in Niger. There's like adobe bricks, organised by Not Vital. That's in his garden. So this is this is me making one of my mud works. So I might characterise that work, even though it's about it's about lots of things, but it's about gravity, because it's about the image that is made by the water falling down. It's also those big mud works are about the micro scale of all the splashes, and like the cosmic variety of every minute part of the work is different from another part. And that's in that's from my recent show in Argentina in a big space in Buenos Aires. So that mud is a beautiful colour because it's from the Pirana River, Pirana, or I don't know how you pronounce it, which actually originates in the Amazon. Yeah, another lady in the middle. Haven't had any men yet, have we? Oh, yes, we have.
I'm a little bit curious about, I understand what inspires you when you're out in nature, but what is the inspiration when you're inside a building that is, a solid interior?
Well,
You don't have
some
that
of the
feeling
works you've seen in my exhibitions hopefully answers that question. But if I'm not inspired, I don't do it. So I have every artist has many, many choices. I could be, I'm one type of an artist, and then another type of artist could use interior spaces in a completely different way from me.
So you don't
But
feel...
I would say that the heart of my work is the landscape and nature, and that's what inspires the works I make indoors.
But when you're working indoors, do you not feel confined?
No, because I do have a desire to make sculptures and mud works which you can actually see in front of you that feed your senses directly, as opposed to showing you photographs of something that I've made thousands of miles away.
Okay.
So I like to feel that the different strategies that I have for making my work cover all the bases, as it were. It's, the photographs and the map works and the text works feed the imagination, and the works in the gallery, or even the photo works that feed the imagination.
Do you know what you're going to do when you start out on your walk in terms of the shapes or the materials you're
No,
going to
obviously
use?
no. Well, I think what I don't know the places I'm going to find. Sorry, who's talking? Oh yeah, I've got to look at you. So on a wilderness walk, one of the nice things is I might go to a place that I've never been to before. So some of these places, like the place where I camped that night and found those stones, I couldn't have anticipated coming to that place. But nevertheless, part of my work is to be an opportunist and make my work that in places that that kind of inspire me to make the work that you see. And then you also alluded to my vocabulary. So I'm very happy with using lines and circles because they don't belong to me. So I'm part of my interest is in these universal, powerful sort of images that are just part of human DNA. Like everyone knows what a circle is. Everyone knows what a straight line is. So you could say that the thing that the originality in my work is the things I do with the circles and lines and the places I choose to put them in. I mean that's rice. That's a chaff from the rice of a paddy field in India, which was just lying around. You can see it scattered, and that's so in a way I just use whatever's there. Yeah.
Yes, I understand you take a walk to be inspired when you're in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach an indoor design?
Well, I'm hoping that how I approach the indoor design is what I've been showing you in some of the installation things.
How do you
So you might say. So I use all my body. So sometimes I make drawings with my fingerprints, or if I'm making a walk, it's made with thousands and millions of. If I walk across Spain, there's many footprints. With the mud works, it's my handprints. So I work in many different ways.
Thank you.
There's a lady up here.
Are you able to tell us about any of your upcoming projects or landscapes you're going to visit?
Probably not, no. I never really like to talk about things I haven't done because it's kind of a bit fraudulent. I mean, in the early days, I could only talk about my work like 10 years, you know, after the first 10 years, and then I knew I had something to talk about. So the work comes first, and then talking about it is you know, way later.
Can I ask, do you have a favorite place that you like to revisit or
Well, I would
revisit
say
in different seasons?
yeah. Well, I guess the English landscape. I am, you know, we all come from somewhere, and I come from England. So I would say that the English landscape is obviously very close to my heart. But then another answer to that would be that I'm attracted to empty, stony places. So you haven't seen any jungles in these pictures. So I suppose I do tend to go for empty, stony places as opposed to lush, verdant. So I like deserts. But I find desert, you know, I mean, there's even like stone deserts in the west of Ireland or in Bolivia, as well as the Sahara, or in this area. Anyone? So, like a work like that, for example, they're all locked together. So when I make that work in another place, all those stones will be in a different place. But nevertheless, it's the same work because it's following the same procedure. So it's the same density, it's the same length, it's the same width. But it's not like an object that, like a Henry Moore sculpture, which is like made once and then it stays the same forever and ever. So it's just a slightly different way of making art. But it's still art. And it's still the same work. So it's a bit like a Japanese rock garden that's raked every morning. So every pebble could be in a different place, but it's still the same garden. Is that it? Thank you.